Welcome to Me, Myself and Mind. We're a wellbeing company that specialises in society's mental and physical health. These podcasts are designed to cover an array of different topics and subjects within the umbrella of wellbeing, having in-depth and real conversations with guest speakers to uncover their experiences, their knowledge, and to provide us with the insights that we can use to improve our own lifestyles. In this episode, we're joined by Eleanor Hoath, studying nutrition therapy at the UK's most prestigious Naturopathic College, with a passion for preventative medicine and understanding the why to our symptoms, with a particular interest in mental health, hormones, and using lifestyle medicine to be our best. So if you'd just like to introduce yourself a little bit more.
So my name's Eleanor and I'm currently studying naturopathic medicine and nutrition therapy at the College of Naturopathic Medicine. I've also got a local business in my area called Elle's Kitchen, and that's where I'm providing meals for people that are busy working on the go, being able to make sure that they're able to eat well and have a lifestyle where they're able to enjoy healthy meals but without having to have the stress of cooking. And like you said, I've got a real passion for wellness and preventative medicine, being able to understand why are my symptoms happening, and also understanding our own bodies using lifestyle medicine.
Yeah. And how did Elle's Kitchen come about?
Originally it started when I was modelling, and I realised that there wasn't really anything on for me in the area when I was trying to find something that was healthy, that was on the go. There's always have things in supermarkets you can just grab and go, but I never really knew what the added ingredients were. I never really knew what the macros and micronutrients were in them, and I just wanted something that I could just grab after a long day that was exactly that. Whereas now, with the understanding that I've got, I really want to put an emphasis on home cooked food that's been made with love, and being able to provide that for customers, that they can actually eat it when they're at work or when they come back after a long day at the office, and they just know that it's a healthy, nutritious, but actually there's no additives and preservatives in there. And I've also developed a nationwide granola range that can be delivered nationwide. So it's actual granola, whereas there's no horrible added sugars and added nasties or anything like that. It's just as it is, with wholesome and whole grain ingredients.
Yeah, so organic foods.
Yeah, all organic.
Yeah.
So it's all full of the good stuff.
That's brilliant to hear. And how have you used nutrition yourself? Have you used it in your own lifestyle to, help your own well-being and your physical health?
Yeah, I mean, my journey's pretty different to most other people that are on my course. I mean, I speak to classmates often about, how did you find nutrition therapy? And all of them always kind of say the same kind of thing about, I was fed up with my symptoms, so I went to see a nutrition therapist, and that's how they found it and that's how they want to practice it. Whereas me, on the other hand, I kind of thought that my diagnosis of IBS was, right, okay, well, I've just got that and that's what it is. The doctors just said, you're one of the unlucky ones. And that's just how that was. It was, follow the low FODMAP diet. Dairy's hurting you. Okay, stop eating dairy. And it almost became a situation where it was, okay, well, I'm going to have to avoid a lot of things that I want to do, and maybe deal with pain and not be able to go on holidays and things like that as much as I really want to. Whereas now, with the education and the learning that I know, IBS is just a syndrome. It's just a collection of symptoms. There is no such thing really as IBS. It's kind of a way of saying, we don't actually know what the problem is there.
Just on that note, do you think nutrition, the advice is limited in the public domain?
I would say so. I mean, I've spoken to doctors and their understanding of nutrition is 7 hours worth of lectures. When you go to the doctors and they say low FODMAP, a low FODMAP diet should really be followed under the supervision of a practitioner, and it should be followed using a time frame of 7 weeks really to understand what your trigger foods are, rather than saying, okay, we're going to follow low FODMAP for a long time. Following low FODMAP means you're cutting out lots of important nutrients and minerals, and there's a very strict list of things that you can't eat, whereas that should be followed for a certain amount of time and then introduce them straight away and say, okay, this food helps, this food is my trigger point.
And how was that journey with IBS for you? You know,
I
was it a
mean,
long one?
I'm still on the journey. I mean, I was saying earlier about how I've just had an operation. I'm still getting on my journey for health and well-being, understanding my own body and why these things happened. You know, I've suffered with anxiety and hormonal acne and all of these things now. I'm starting to like pull them all together and say, okay, this makes sense now. And being able to heal my own body, but also being able to educate and empower other people to do so. I just think it's fascinating.
So it's not just down to one particular thing that's causing those symptoms.
Definitely
it's
not.
Your lifestyle and everything else.
Yeah, and as well, there's no one size fits all. I mean, one person might come along to our clinic and say, you know, oh, I've got this and this is working for me. But then for the next person who's got a very similar problem, it's the complete opposite thing, which is where I think with nutrition therapy and taking a functional medicine perspective, it's a lot more individualized to that person. And rather than saying, you've got this, you need to take this, or you've got this, you need to have that, you're looking at the individual, looking at their genetics, looking at their environment, their parents, how they've even been born, and using that to amend it.
So on that note, with the new research, what do you think about the brain-gut connection? I'm sure that...
Oh, it's so important. And I'm so pleased now that it's actually being put out there and people are actually getting an understanding that there is such thing as the brain-gut connection or the brain-gut axis, as we call it. So I like to think of the body as kind of like a wood fire. So imagine that you've got a fire burning and you're adding a load to this fire. If you're adding wood, that's going to preserve it for a lot longer, and you're adding good stuff to it. Whereas if you're adding things like processed food, for example, that's more seen as like touch paper, so it's gonna preserve it for a little bit longer. But obviously with the gut brain axis, in our actual gut we have something called the enteric nervous system, and the enteric nervous system is basically the brain of the gut. And it's amazing because it's got over 10 million neurons in it, which is actually more than in your whole spinal cord, which I always find fascinating. So with that gut brain connection, you can actually stimulate the biggest neuron in that connection, which is called the vagus nerve. And with the vagus nerve, we have quite a few therapies that have been coming available now. So things like massage, there's quite a few things in terms of like tapping of the head and things like that that stimulate the vagus nerve, and they can signal a feel good response, if you will. So it's all about making sure that what's going on in the gut is also helping with the mind.
Whole system.
Yeah, you know, it's so connected, and that's when they say go with your gut. Well, go with your gut because your brain and your gut are so connected. You know, when we're stressed, we have more like a sympathetic response, and it's you actually feel gut symptoms rather than people saying, oh, it's all in your mind. Like, no, you actually feel it in the gut.
Physically.
So the research that's coming out is so exciting, and I'm so glad that people are saying, you know, oh, it might be linked to the gut and things like that. So, yeah.
So would you say, you know, the foods that you're directly putting into your body is having an effect on your well-being? Like, you know, your moods, your brain, how it's working?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, there's chemical messengers in the body that are all made from amino acids. So like tryptophan, for example, now tryptophan actually ends up eventually becoming serotonin, which we all know is the happy hormone. So when you've got that happy hormone going on in the brain, you feel good, you feel way better. And, you know, by eating certain foods that are made of tryptophan, so most of the time they come from protein sources, so things like turkey, eggs, nuts, seeds, salmon. They're able to give that response, and eventually you will reach a point where there is serotonin in the brain, and you are going to get a feel-good response from that. And, you know, without vitamin D, for example, we can't actually make that conversion from tryptophan to serotonin, which is why people always say, oh, I feel really low in the winter. Well, in the winter, you're not getting any sunshine. Sunshine gives you the vitamin D, and without the vitamin D, you can't convert it. So that's where SAD syndrome comes from.
And, you know, that's a massive thing that I don't think enough people know about.
100%.
That through the winter, people should be supplementing with vitamin D.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's actually a government guideline that everyone should be supplementing vitamin D from the month of October all the way through to March. You know, it's not just a case of, oh, only the people that feel it, you know, you need it. Your body isn't getting any vitamin D. I mean, you know, in the summer we sometimes go out the house at 7 o'clock in the morning and the sun's out. In the winter you go out the house at 9 o'clock and the sun's only just making an appearance. We'll go straight into our offices and we don't get any sunlight at all. I mean, I've been looking at myself this week, for instance. I've been at home resting from my operation and I haven't been outside once. So those are the instances when you need to get the sunlight, and without that sunlight there are so many chemical messengers and pathways in the body that need that vitamin D.
Well, I suppose we're evolved to be outside.
Exactly. And, you know, there are the odd foods that you can get vitamin D from, but at the end of the day, the sunlight is the best source of vitamin D. It's the active form. It's the way that we need it. Yeah.
So is there anything else that happens within the body when we do consume vitamin D? You know, is there anything else that it's preserving?
Yeah, no, vitamin D is such an important vitamin. There is quite a lot of research recently showing about how vitamin D is vital in terms of like for bone health. So, you know, people always say dairy, and we need dairy for our bones, but without vitamin D we can't use the calcium from the dairy in order to get the bone strength. And you know, it's important for our skin health, it's important for our liver function. Everything you need vitamin D to be able to make those neural connections.
Do you think there's enough spoken about vitamin D though?
I think we're getting there. I mean, you know, I said earlier about how the government guidelines say that we should be supplementing vitamin D. Whether people all know that and whether people all do that is a different story. But I know that it is out there, whereas before it was kind of, if and when you need it. And, you know, we're getting a lot more of a better understanding of quality of supplements as well. You know, there are quite a few supplements on the market that it's more plastic than it is vitamin D. So we're getting a really good understanding of supplementation and why we need it in certain times of the year, why certain diets might need certain supplements and things like that as well.
You know, talking about serotonin production and chemical reactions that are happening within the body, I don't think enough people drink enough water for these chemical reactions to actually occur within the body.
For sure. I mean, with water, we need to be able to hydrate all the different areas in the body. I mean, I try and recommend that people drink at least 2 litres of water a day. Obviously, it depends on circumstances. But an interesting fact, especially around water, is that people say, oh, well, I've had it, but not in water. I've had it in cups of tea. So tea is caffeine. Caffeine actually depletes you from the water that you drink. So for every cup of coffee or every cup of tea that you drink, you need to drink a bit more water on top of that. So I always try and aim for like 2 litres of water a day plus herbal tea, because herbal tea is just liquid but flavoured and full of nice herbs.
We've started doing that, haven't we? Reducing our caffeine intake. But on that note, do you think, as it was saying on one of our questions here, in a fast-paced 21st century, do you think they're making poor food choices?
It's a tough one. I mean, we're getting an understanding now of why we need to be eating the good stuff. And, you know, at train stations, there isn't somewhere where you can go and get an organic, healthy salad where you've chosen what meat and what vegetables, and that just doesn't happen. You know, when you're running around and you're on the train back from work, there isn't the option to grab that. I mean, you can quickly grab a burger at the quick fast food outlet and scoff it as you go in, but you know, there isn't the option to do that. And that's obviously where, like, I kind of developed my business with Elle's Kitchen, is to have that people can put it in their bags and take it as they go. I mean, it's something that we're getting there with. I mean, I'm seeing more and more cafes, and you know, there are places such as like Pret a Manger, for example, that they've got the salad boxes and they've got them and they're ready to go. But it's ensuring that we know what's actually in them that I find quite difficult. And people often say to me, oh, well, I had a chicken salad for lunch from the supermarket. Okay, what was the dressing? What was this? And did it have any preservatives in it? And it's those kind of things. But with our busy modern world, I think we're in a world of where lifestyle and wellness is completely neglected. You know, it's cool if you're stressed. Like, I don't get that. Why would you? Stress causes so much oxidative stress on the body, which leads to disease, and it leads to really harsh amount of disease and chemicals and stress on your body. So when did we get to a point where it was like, if you're not stressed, God, you're not doing well enough, you know?
If you're not grinding.
Yeah, exactly. And I would much rather say from a point of view, like, yeah, I've worked hard, and yeah, I do, everyone has stress, you can't get rid of it, of course, but being able to say that stress is so detrimental to your body that when we're chronically stressed, we're just wearing ourselves down.
Yeah.
You know the food companies out there, do you think they're sort of masquerading some of the foods as healthy products, but they're actually not? Going back to these salads that could be full of salt and
I think they're
dressings.
doing their best. I mean, it's hard in the world that we're in, that obviously people are starting to get a really good understanding about eating well on the go and Instagrammable food, as I call it, you know, really lovely colours and things like that. But it's they've got their intentions in the right place, but then it's looking back to making it available to the consumer. You know, if they're going to make ridiculous amount of salads and things like that to have on the supermarket shelves, something's got to be in it to keep it on that shelf for a long time. It's not possible to have foods that are completely fresh on the go, you know, unless you're going to be paying over the odds for them. It's just not feasible.
And talking about, you know, we're talking about stress in the 21st century, everyone's on the go. I've noticed that on your Instagram you've talked about the importance of relaxation when you're having your meals. Could you just talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I actually made like a little plan just to talk about this, because I know that so many people actually are really interested in it. So when we actually eat food, what we need to actually connect with the food that we're about to eat in order to get our digestive system ready for the food that we're about to eat. So when we break these down, we're making sure that the amylase, for example, so the digestive enzymes in our bodies, are able to actually digest those foods. So even when you're cooking, if you ever notice when you cook, you know, you smell the food and you start to salivate a little bit. And that's your body's way of saying, you know, oh, there's food coming. It's like dogs, when they see food, it's everywhere. You know, we're the exact same as that. So when we're like scoffing a sandwich in our mouths at the same time as answering an email, or you know, we're running to and from trains and we're shoving in whatever we've just grabbed from the train station, we don't really tend to chew that food properly. And I always remember my lecturer, whenever I talk about this, saying, you've only got one set of teeth. So when you're actually not chewing that food, it's going down in whole pieces. So it's probably going to try and come out as a whole piece as well. So you're not actually absorbing anything that you're taking there. And you know, when we're like putting that food down our gobs, we can't absorb all those minerals. And that's where we get symptoms such as bloating and, you know, oh, why is my stomach so bloated? Well, did you chew that food that you put in your mouth, or did you just let it go straight down? You know, it's those.
I'm definitely.
We're all guilty.
I need to work on that.
I mean, I'm so guilty of doing this. Like, I can't say that I haven't sat on the train and tried to wolf a salad down as quickly as I can. You know, with the modern day that we live in, it's impossible to not do that. But, you know, there are tips and tricks that you can do to try and make sure that those things like are avoided where possible. So, you know, if you are eating on the go, one of the things that I like really recommend to people is I would say, you know, first of all, like slowing down how quickly you're eating. And the way that we can do that is to try and make a connection with the food. So getting into a parasympathetic state with our plate in front of us. So mindful eating, connecting with the food and saying, okay, so on my plate I've got this, which is really going to help my body to do this. I've also got some protein, which is going to help, and with that protein it's going to transfer to serotonin, which is going to make me feel good after I've eaten this food. Breathing, there are so many apps now that I've noticed, and Headspace is one that I really recommend people download. Because they actually have a mindful eating section of the app, so you can actually listen to this. So, you know, sometimes if you are in a really busy environment eating your lunch,
you eat faster,
you eat quicker. But with Headspace, I've found sometimes you can put that in and you can listen, and you can actually zone out of the world and kind of meditate with your food without sounding a bit strange. But it's so good to be able to say, oh, okay, like I've taken some time and really, you know, had some time with my food and taken some time for me. Being able to acknowledge, am I really hungry, or am I just kind of woofing it down because I need to?
And would you say that slowing down will prevent us from overeating, you know?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, one of the things is like, you know, when you're shoving it down your mouth and you kind of think, oh, actually, I'm full now. But when you can't take the time to say, I am full, if you're just continuously putting it in your mouth.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, mindful eating, putting your fork down and taking the time to chew the food and then go, actually, no, I am full. I'm not going to finish that food. And one of the biggest problems that we have in modern society is overeating. And we don't acknowledge when we're full. At the end of a meal, we'll sit there and expect to have a food baby. And we shouldn't be waiting for a food baby. We should be waiting for a feeling of fullness.
So do you think, obviously slowing the food down, slowing the process, mindful eating, do you think then that's going to drastically reduce these ill health symptoms to a point?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, especially digestive upset, so things like bloating and things like that as well. It's one of those things where you know, it is preventable, and, you know, just taking some deep breaths. I mean, the amount of people that, you know, they might run into the staff room after a really busy call with the boss and they're so stressed out and then they go and eat straight away. It's like the blood isn't in your gut ready to digest that food. The blood is everywhere else, and without the blood being in the gut, we can't actually make the peristalsis movements that I'm sure people learn about in their GCSE science classes that are able to move the food along.
If we didn't learn about that, could you just elaborate on that?
Yes, the peristalsis is like the movement of like the waves along your intestines. So it starts in like the large intestine, and it's basically the formation of a stool, basically. So being that peristaltic muscle contraction that moves the food along, and eventually when we go to the toilet, that's what that peristalsis movement caused. So without that, the food isn't going to move; it's just going to be stuck, and then we're going to get bloating, constipation, gas, everything.
And there's been quite a few companies that have come along on the back of that, almost end of pipe solution with these tablets to help the stools and constipation, hasn't there? And I suppose if you interviewed them and asked how much water they drank to help the digestion, how fast they ate, maybe that would be something that they would have to use.
And I think as well with things like that, it's like sometimes it's a bit of a quick fix, and it's rather than in getting to the root cause of the problem and saying, okay, well, this is why this is happening, and you know, just taking some time and thinking, you know, this is your own body. Just take some time, work out what works for you. If you're the kind of person that wakes up and you're absolutely ravenous, then eat when you wake up and you're absolutely ravenous. Don't wait until your friend is, who can wait a little bit later on. It's one of those kind of suit what works for you.
So I suppose that links into a little bit about, you know, meal timing, and we said we was going to talk a little bit about fasting.
Yeah, sure. So with fasting, it's become a bit of a trend now. I kind of think it's become one of those things where it's like, oh, intermittent fasting, oh, I do that. Whereas, you know, fasting's been around for decades. It's in religions. It's quite a few religions go like weeks without eating, and it's not something that's just been like a crazy craze that's just come along and everyone should jump on the bandwagon. It has its therapeutics behind it. So we need to give our stomach quite a lot of time to digest the food that we've actually put in. Ultimately, we should be aiming for 12 to 14 hours between our evening meal and our breakfast the next day. This is just because our stomach needs time to move that food along and actually fully digest it. I mean, it's the same with making, you know, you wouldn't just continually sit and eat all day. There's more research now that before it was always about, you know, eating small meals little and often. The research now that's coming out is saying, actually, no, we should go back to the way that our ancestors did it, having a big breakfast, a medium-sized lunch and a pretty small dinner later on, because it allows our body to actually digest the first meal that we eat properly when all those digestive enzymes and acids and everything are ready to digest it. It's a form of therapy, fasting is, and you know, there are some diseases, so things like Crohn's disease and IBD and leaky gut, where fasting is actually used as a therapeutic, and using tools such as like bone broth and things like that to be able to actually heal a broken gut, basically, with fasting.
So it almost gives your stomach time to rest.
I mean, you wouldn't say to your body, right, you need to continue doing this all the time and not sleep at all. Your gut needs the same. You need to clear yesterday's food. You need your body just needs to rest. And one of the things that I always found really fascinating is, you know, when your stomach grumbles and you think, oh God, I'm hungry, actually that is kind of just the food pushing along. So you need to sometimes think to yourself, am I hungry, or is it just, you know, my stomach's moving it along a little bit?
It's so interesting, and fasting has become massive recently. I've been fasting for years, but I don't necessarily use it as, you know, I didn't start with a health intervention. It's just because I'm generally greedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I'm left to my own devices,
you'll just eat all day.
From breakfast, I can eat and I can keep eating and eating and eating.
Yeah.
And for me, it gives me that sense of control over myself.
Yeah, and that's the other thing as well, you know, it's having the mindset of, right, okay, I've had my evening meal now and I'm not going to eat until breakfast time. And being able to say that you've done that, it's a great thing. You know, there are some people where it's physically not possible to be able to do that, you know, if you're working shift work and things like that, but you just need to allow your body to do its
rest,
thing and rest, really.
I mean, it does feel good, doesn't it? It's a self-discipline.
Yeah.
When you can actually do that.
And as well, you know, I always find that, like, so I'm quite a morning person, I have to say, and if I sit down to do some revision, I'll always try and get a little bit of revision done before I actually have my breakfast, and I found that I always focus more. And then I was a bit like, okay, so why is this? Started to look into the research for it. Well, because your body can focus on what you're doing rather than focusing on the food that you're trying to digest.
Yeah.
The blood supply is going to my brain. Exactly, the blood's in the brain while I'm taking in what I'm trying to do, rather than thinking, right, we need to try and push the breakfast along and digest that and break that down, and what minerals and vitamins and everything can we take from that.
Yeah. I would definitely, if I've got meetings or if I've got anything specific like a podcast or whatever, or a talk, I generally like to have an empty stomach. It just makes me feel more alert, more ready, and I can just concentrate a lot better. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm the biggest foodie you'll ever meet, and if I want a big bowl of porridge before I've got an exam, then I will go and have that big bowl of porridge. But everyone's different, and sometimes having an empty stomach can actually mean that you're thriving. But that isn't to say, you know, just don't eat because you'll do better.
Don't starve yourself.
Yeah, make sure that you are aiming for those 3 meals a day, full of your vitamins, minerals, lots of colours. So
So talking about the food education, how do you think education of food, healthy eating has gone on in schools now? Do you think that's progressed?
I think so. I think, you know, the work of like people such as Jamie Oliver, you know, they're really trying to get their hands on schools. One of the things that I'm really interested in from speaking to like classmates at the moment, one of my friends actually works within a school, and she's always saying, you know, the kids are always having like energy crashes. Like, why are they having that? And it's one of those things. It's like, okay, so what are they having for breakfast? What is their fuel for the day? Is it full of sugar? Is it, you know, the brightly coloured cereals, or are they having something that's full of like nice whole grains and stuff? And then when you get into school, well, what are they eating at school? Are the school dinners packed with sugar, or are they allowing for a steady release of energy? And, you know, being able to say more fruit and vegetables on the school plates. I mean, I always remember my plates at school being those colourful ones where you had like your big meal and then your little area for your dessert and things like that. Well, do we need dessert with lunch, or can we wait and maybe have that every now and then? It's one of those things of I think we really know that we need to get our hands on schools, because that's where the education starts. And you know, we're teaching children at schools that, okay, with every meal we have to have dessert afterwards. We don't.
I think some of the schools do ban the chips and the junk food on certain days, which is a good thing, I think, because, you know, children, no disrespect, and they're probably going to just go straight for the junk food, aren't they? It's
true. And, you know, my cousin was saying to me the other day that his school have just started meat-free Mondays, and he was moaning about it and saying, oh, I don't want it. I like my meat. And I was like, I know, but you can get like your protein from elsewhere, and it's important to say, you know, that meat actually is a luxury to us. You know, before in our ancestors' days, you know, they'd have a whole chicken and that whole chicken would last them for the week, whereas now we have chicken, pork, salmon every single day. So more meat-free days, I think, is becoming quite common, especially in schools, which some parents aren't too pleased about, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Do you think there needs to be more education for parents? Because as we age, we obviously become habitual. You know, well, we're habitual creatures, but as we age, we get into routines and habits, and, you know, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But then they pass that on and influence their children. Maybe if there was more education out there for parents from the school, maybe. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it's a tough one, because you can educate people, and people are really educated. You know, parents do their best for their children, but sometimes it's just not it's just not feasible. You know, we can sit there and say to parents, you know, make some overnight oats for your child to take to school. They're not going to take it. You know, they're 5 years old and their friends are having Cocoa Pops for breakfast. You know, it's one of those things of like, if it's like the environment that you're brought up in, you know, if that's kind of the norm to you, then that's fine. But if it's a sudden change, that's not okay. And I think parents do have a really good education about it. Maybe we do need to start incorporating more education for nutrition in terms of from when a baby is very little, rather than when it's too late and it's in schools and we're saying
develop the habits.
Eat 5 a day, but it's too late. That hasn't been the norm when they've been at home.
I just thought of an idea. It could be bring your parent to work day.
There we go.
You know, to educate them. If they do healthy food stuff, to show what they actually eat. And then that involves the connection even more, doesn't it? With the teachers and the children.
I think that's the thing. It's all about working together. I mean, you know, in class at school, in college, we always say about, you know, whenever we have children that come in to our clients, as our clients, it's all about saying, you know, well, okay, so who does the food shop at home? And can you go with your mum to say, just choose some of the different alternatives? You know, if you've got a child that comes and they say, I don't think dairy's sitting well with me, you know, well, is mum going to start buying dairy-free milk to help with that? You know, it's one of those things where, especially in the family environment, you have to work together as a whole to be able to make those changes. You can't just have the one person who's like, right, this is how I'm going we do it, because
everybody's
it just doesn't
got to be
work.
involved.
Everyone's got to be involved.
So we were talking about, you were saying about sugar crashes. Can we talk a little bit more about how sugar affects the body?
So one of the things that is becoming quite interesting now is the fascination with blood sugar balance. And I think people always have this theory about sugar being more addictive than cocaine, you know. So I always think of it as like, you know, with cocaine, it's an actual dopamine receptor. You know, it's one of those things where, and this is just with addiction in total anyway. With when we take cocaine, for example, that actually binds to a dopamine receptor, which means that we're saying, okay, we can't actually make ourselves have a reward pathway anymore. So it makes our body say, okay, well, we need more of that because we can't get the feel-good response. We're intolerant to it. Whereas with sugar, it's more of a thing about what the body's saying it needs, because you haven't given it something else. So for example, let's say for breakfast you had white piece of bread, toast with some jam on it, quite high sugar breakfast. And then about 2 hours later you're thinking, I'm hungry again. Well, that's because your blood sugar spiked so high when you had your breakfast that 2 hours later it's gone straight back down again. So we want to try and be working to make the blood sugar go like straight along, rather than make it sustainable and make a constant blood sugar flow, rather than our blood constantly going up and down, up and down. So we can do things like that. So adding more protein with breakfast, for example. If you want to have some toast, have the toast, but maybe put an egg on top of it rather than some strawberry jam, because the protein's going to sustain us for a lot longer, rather than leading to the blood sugar crashes that we're having throughout the day. And it's the same with sweeteners as well, for example. You know, we went through a stage where research suggested that having a sweetener instead of the real sugar was the best way to go about it. Whereas now the evidence is showing that actually we're just tricking our brains into thinking we're having sugar that we're actually not having. So then that's where you end up with getting situations like diabetes type 2, where you're telling your body that there is sugar coming. I always describe it as like the boy that cried wolf. You're telling that the body there is coming, so insulin's created and it's all going well, but actually there's no sugar there. So you're not going to get the energy from it. It's just a constant trick to the brain.
Are you still going to get that response within the body? So your body will be expecting the sugar and you'll probably get the sugar high, but in terms of the actual chemical messengers, there's no glucose, there's no insulin, and we need those to be able to generate ATP. Now ATP is what we need for energy production, and if we haven't got that, then every system in the body is slowly going to go down, and that's when we're going to start being, I could do with a piece of chocolate, I could do with a coffee, I could do with a biscuit. Circle, so that's when we start to get those sugar cravings. Would you say that's because we've conditioned ourselves to be having so much sugar every day?
Yeah, for sure. And I also think as well, you know, hidden sugars in food. So sometimes you might buy a cereal, for example, thinking, this looks quite healthy, but how much sugar is in it? You know,
again, it's back to marketing, do you think?
Exactly. And, you know, it's quite difficult to say that because these businesses do have the best intentions, but also they want to make it taste nice, and that's where the extra sugars come into it and things like that. So sometimes I try and suggest, have a really high nutrient dense protein filled breakfast and see how it affects you. By lunchtime, are you absolutely ravenous like you would be if you just had your jam on toast? And see how it goes.
They used to have that back in the day, go to work on an egg. That was the advert.
Oh, right, okay.
It was really widely promoted. So.
Yeah, I mean, I try and aim for like a big protein-filled breakfast. I always make my family laugh because my breakfast is very big. It's, like oats and nut butters and everything on it. And then throughout the day, my meals kind of get slower and smaller, just because that's what my body wants, and in a way being able to get that protein first thing in the day. By the time it's 4 o'clock, I'm not sitting there thinking, I need a biscuit to be able to get myself through the last couple of hours of the day. I'm sitting there going, I'm all right, I can carry on, I'll just have another cup of tea or something. So
does too much sugar within the body cause inflammation? So
sugar is actually the biggest inflammatory food that there is, especially when you get your refined sugars, so your white sugars, so your white bread, your white pasta, obviously your chocolate bars, your biscuits. It just causes a constant cycle of inflammation, which is where you end up getting an inflamed body, which is where we get diseases that are caused by inflammation. So things like osteoarthritis, who would have thought that could possibly be linked to the fact that when you were younger you might have had a few too many treats here and there.
Does it age you as well? Question the sugar. Too much refined sugar.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that it goes into the bloodstream, and then the blood is actually becomes full of glucose. So can we excrete that sugar quick enough? Probably not.
And obviously people want to be eating fruit, and often they ask the question, but isn't there sugar in fruit? What would you say to that?
My answer is, well, there is sugar in fruit, but it's naturally occurring sugars. And as well, when you have a chocolate bar, there's not much fibre in a chocolate bar, whereas with an apple, for example, there is a lot of fibre in an apple. It's one of the most fibrous fruits that there is, and it actually really helps with digestion. My advice would always be go for your fruit in the morning, just because it's going to be used up. It's going to be used up quicker, and if you are going to get that trough, at least you can eat lunch a little bit later. Whereas if your afternoon snack is grapes, for example, then you're going to probably get that crash maybe within an hour, and then you'll be reaching for something else sweet to pick yourself back up again.
I was just going to say about that. Go on, Dan.
I was just going to say about, are there any foods in particular that are anti-inflammatory?
Yeah, so we're always looking at like anti-inflammatory diet. The Mediterranean diet is pretty much what everyone calls the best diet. I don't personally believe there is such thing as the best diet. Everyone's unique, but being able to have an anti-inflammatory diet which is quite high in protein, high in unsaturated fats and healthy fats, so your avocados, your nuts, seeds, and being able to have an array of colour in the diet, I just think that is so important. That's where my tagline for my business, Elle's Kitchen, is colourful plate, colourful life, because I always say, the more colour that's on the plate, the more phytonutrients and vitamins that you're actually taking in, which is going to contribute to it. But whenever people say anti-inflammatory, I always think of things like curcumin from turmeric, ginger, garlic, just throwing like some ginger into your morning smoothie, for example. It's just such a really good way of getting some anti-inflammatory properties into that meal.
And when you said colourful plate, colourful life, is each colour doing something different, within the body? So every colour does something different. We always kind of associate orange foods with immunity, for example. We associate greens with skin health, but greens, I always try and increase more leafy greens. I'm one of these weird people. Well, so weird, but yeah. But if there's no kind of leafy green on my plate, I'm thinking I need to put something on there because they're so full of important vitamins, phytonutrients, and it's one of those that we just need to incorporate more of them into our diet. But red, heart health, we always see these things on Instagram and think, is that real? But every single colour means something. And I always think back to Dr. Chatterjee, for example, who he always says one of the things that he tries to do with his children is he always puts a colour chart in the kitchen. So every colour that you eat, you go and tick it off. And I think that's a really good way, especially for children, to be saying, look, you've ticked all the colours off of the rainbow today.
that's a reward in itself, because you've eaten all of those good nutrients and those good foods.
Yeah,
they'll carry that through into later life, won't they?
Oh, for sure. And I'm always winding people up and saying, look how many colours are on your plate. And you know, whenever I cook at home, it's always a colourful plate when Elle's cooked. So yeah.
Just on the note of all the vitamins and minerals, do you think naturally we're saying we're not getting enough micronutrients, and is there enough micronutrients within the fruits and the vegetables today? I'm just thinking about the farming and the methods they use to grow these vegetables. What do you think?
So our macronutrients are things such as like protein, fats and carbs. So those are the things that we all really, really need to survive. So when it comes to protein, for example, when you just mentioned about the farming and things like that, previously it was all based on what's in the soil. So the soil would have all of those important vitamins and minerals in them, and that's where we got B12 from. So it's a well-known fact that if you're following a vegan diet, B12 is one of the only vitamins that you can't get from a vegan diet, because that's come from animals. But actually originally it came from the soil that the animals would be eating. So previously you would be able to get B12 as a vegan, but from the vegetables. But now, because the soil's been depleted and it's washed and it's got so many chemicals, and you know, it's not farmed in the same way, that those minerals have massively been depleted. Then we've got our macro minerals, so things like magnesium, sodium, chlorine and sulfur, which we need to be able to perform everyday tasks. So without magnesium, we can't form a blood clot. We need to be able to muscle contraction and things like that. You know, zinc, being able to being able to get, exactly, it's just so important. And then you've got your B vitamins, which are really important for your skin, your nails, everything to do with the nervous system. You know, you know, B vitamin deficiency is one of the leading causes for diseases such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease, and it's something that's just so prominent now in our Western world that we are being depleted of these really key vitamins and minerals.
And do we need to start supplementing with these, or, you know, how do we go about getting them through diet if we can?
I mean, I would always, you know, eat the rainbow. Those fruits and vegetables will give you everything and more that you need. I would always say, you know, for supplementation, we need to always be supplementing vitamin D through the winter months. Everyone needs to do that. Whereas, you know, vitamins such as omega-3 and B12, I'd always advise a vegan to supplement those kind of foods, those vitamins, and also if you don't eat any fish as well, then omega-3, you're probably going to want to supplement some of that. Omega-3 is so important, not only for your brain health and skin health and hair health, but, you know, being able to convert all of these different foods into their active form. We need omega-3 to be able to do those. And the best form of those is to come from oily fish. So I always think of your smashed fish, so your salmon, mackerel, anchovies, your sardines and your herring, to be able to get those vitamins. But obviously if you're following a vegan diet, not always get that. And you can get it from flax seeds, but you'd need to eat a blooming and a lot of them to be able to get the same amount that you'd be able to get from the mackerel.
Would that affect the digestive system, that flaxseed?
And soaked flax seeds has actually been shown to be really good for alleviating constipation. So soaking flax seeds overnight and eating them. So really good, you know, to take a spoonful of them every day if you are struggling. However, if you're taking them every day, you might end up getting a bit of an issue.
Using the toilet too much.
Especially as a vegan.
I'd say one supplement that I've been using for probably the last 12 months is magnesium. I've noticed considerable changes in my mood. I'm so much more relaxed. And I was trying quite a bit, and I was getting quite a lot of cramps. And since supplementing with spraying magnesium on, I'm not only not having the cramps, I'm feeling much more relaxed. You know?
Magnesium, again, it's one of those macro minerals that without it, loads of the body functions can't work, and especially for like muscle function. So being able to actually contract, and those actin and myosin filaments that actually allow us to contract and release our muscles, especially for muscle training and things like that. You know, one of the best feelings in the world is going to the gym and then coming back and having a magnesium or Epsom salt bath. It just feels incredible, because it's allowing those muscles to just relax just for a minute before we can get out the bath and have to carry on with the day-to-day tasks. And you know,
like you've entered another dimension.
Honestly, it is. It's amazing. And you know, you can get them from the sprays, for example, and from your magnesium baths and things, but you know, all leafy greens have got magnesium in them. They're an amazing source, as well as nuts and seeds, legumes, some whole grains, and also your soy. So things like tofu, for example, have got a great amount of magnesium, and they're a great source of protein. I think we've been scaremongered a little bit away from eating things like tofu because there is so many options available that are processed, and you know, but if we're getting an organic piece of tofu that we can cook and do it how we like, then there's no problem with that.
I mean, I did hear that soy unbalances your hormones, but is there truth to that? Or
there is a little bit of truth to it, you know, especially for females. It can, you know, mess with your estrogen metabolism, but then again, it all depends on the person. If you haven't got a hormonal imbalance, then do we need to be wary of this? Or, you know, it's trying to work out what suits you. It's using soy and tofu, for example, as a therapeutic for helping women's hormones is incredible, but you know, it's not something that I would be like, oh no, you really shouldn't eat that because it's really bad for your hormones. Every now and then it won't hurt.
That's on our next question, really. What are there any specific foods that you would definitely include and or avoid?
I would just say to eat more plants. Eat more plants and eat more colour, you know,
as you were saying.
And in terms of avoiding food, I would never deem a food to be a bad food. You know, I would happily sit there and eat a massive slice of chocolate cake. I follow the 80-20 rule, 80% eating well, 20% eating, you know, having a nice treat every now and then. If I go out for dinner with my boyfriend and we're celebrating, I'm not going to sit there and be like, I'm only going to eat vegetables. If there's wine and if there's a piece of cake on the menu, that is going to be mine. But, you know, it's making about the simple swaps. So, you know, switching your white pasta to whole grain pasta and, you know, having brown bread instead of white bread. And it's about making those swaps. I don't really like I don't like to encourage demonizing food and saying that certain foods are guilty foods, because
we're not robots.
Exactly. And you know, it just perpetuates, you know, like eating disorders and, you know, demonizing foods and counting calories and things like that. I'm not a fan of it.
Brilliant. So just to leave it there, if there were, you know, if you were to give 3 tips to improve our health and well-being on what to eat, what to supplement and when to get it, could you give us 3 tips to leave it there?
So I would say eat the rainbow, colourful plate, colourful life. I would say to drink more water, move a bit more, you know, movement, it's free. I did a post on my Instagram that people really enjoyed about just going out for a walk. It's one of the best things I do for my own mind. If I'm sitting there and I'm thinking this is just getting too much, fresh air and movement are free. Utilise them. In terms of supplementation, vitamin D, obviously, to make yourself feel good throughout the winter months, and also just to be allow your body to do its thing, and when to eat them. Allow your body to have a rest. You wouldn't expect yourself to keep going without resting for a little bit, so don't expect your gut to do the same thing.
Well, thank you for coming on.
No, that's all right. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.